Hi, I'm Dr. Denise Taylor, and I want to give you a bit of background on me. I think sometimes it's quite nice to know how somebody has reached the stage in life that they're at. And that's something that I'll be talking about at another stage as well. But let me just tell you about my background and how I've come to be an author and the reasons that I write the way that I do. Okay, so there we are in my living room. And just some background. I left school at 16. In fact, I left school at 15 because my birthday is the end of August. I've been working for a month before I turned 16. My dad thought education was wasted on a woman. And way back in 1973, a lot of women, a lot of both sexes, we just left school at 15 and 16. So I hadn't any really higher education. But what I did do is start Open University. And I started Open University in 1981. And by 1988, I'd got a first degree in psychology. I was working for Royal Mail, and I started off as a counter clerk, selling stamps and doing driving licenses and stuff like that. And then I began to get promoted. And one of the things that led to was they paid for my education. So they paid for me to do my first degree in psychology, and then they paid for me to do a master's degree in occupational psychology. And doing that along the same time as working meant that I became chartered in 1992, which is a big thing. And 2 years later, I became an associate fellow. I started off as a standard psychologist working in industry, helping people with recruitment, selection, counselling, redundancy, all of those sorts of things. And then just before my 40th birthday, I took a package to leave and set myself up doing independent work. And I've put 25 plus years, I think it's probably 30 years, supporting midlife and later life career transitions with people as a self-employed independent careers practitioner. And I've written 7 or 8 books. I sometimes lose track, but one of the ones was Find Work at 50 Plus and Rethinking Retirement for Positive Aging. But I'm going to go on about my books a bit later on. And I got my doctorate at 64 that people were quite amazed about. It's like, yeah, you're not too old and it's not too late. And it was something I really wanted to do. So let me tell you a bit more about me. And I've been writing for years, and way back working for Royal Mail, I used to be a welfare officer, which was a cross between being a social worker and the Citizens Advice Bureau. And one of the things I spent a lot of time doing was talking to, and they were predominantly postal women, about pregnancy and maternity rights and everything. And I wrote a little book, and it was so well regarded that it was used throughout the post office businesses. And so that was my first lot of writing. And now, why do I write? And now pretty much I'm a full-time writer because it's how I make sense of what I'm learning about myself and the world. And I love sharing information with other people. And truly, I enjoy it when people say, how can you write so much? It's like, but I can't not write. It's just so much part of who I am. Now, early on, and the first book I wrote was How to Get a Job in a Recession. And the image there at the left-hand side is the second edition. So the first edition came out in 2009. And the reason I wrote that was I was the guest expert on Tonight with Trevor McDonald, if you remember that programme. And I was helping graduates get a job because we had a recession back then. And the director said, you ought to write a book. And I tried to get a book deal. And it was going to be like 2 years. And I thought, I need to write this book. And somehow back in 2009, I set up my own publishing company. It was a lot of work and I made some mistakes, but hey, that's how you learn about stuff. So the first book came out in 2009. And then I got asked by a publisher to write winning interview answers for first-time job hunters. And it's like, yeah, all right, I can write that one. And I remember I was on a holiday with my husband and we were in Egypt and I was around the pool with my computer. And when my husband went to get a beer at the bar, as he tended to, the guy said, what's your wife doing? Is she writing a book? And he goes like, well, yeah, she is actually. And then I got asked by another publisher to write Now You've Been Shortlisted, which was all about interviews, assessment centres and psychometric testing. So I ended up writing 3 books in a year. And I did it alongside all my career coaching clients. Goodness knows how I managed. And then 2 years later, I brought out the second edition of How to Get a Job in a Recession. So these are the early stages of doing published books. And I was a bit unsure and relying on my editors. And particularly for the middle book, I had to write to a brief. And when I went in a slightly different direction, it was like, that's not what we asked you to write. And I realized at that point, I don't want to write to a brief. I want to be able to have a lot more autonomy about my writing style. But they're my early books. And then I got approached by Icon Books to write a book. And it started off as Getting the Job You Want. And then they rebranded it as Find Your Dream Job. And then they brought out a special edition for the University of Surrey. And I think there was 1,750 copies were printed for that. And, you know, actually, at this point, you might be thinking, wow, she's had all these books published, she makes lots of money. No, you don't. Although, going back to the Harriman House book, which was this one here, Now You've Been Shortlisted, that one, Kindles had just started coming out, and I was getting 50% of the price of each ebook. And that was enough to pay for us both to go on a holiday. I can't remember where we went, but I think we might have been, well, wherever we went. But the royalties were really good. But royalties have just dropped because, you know, it's harder unless you're a celebrity with a ghostwriter to write a book. But even so, got my name out there, got my clients, and it was building my reputation. So at this point, I've got a reputation doing careers coaching and knowing about this sort of stuff, particularly around how to get a job. And then I was commissioned again. And this was to write Find Work at 50 plus, because at this point I'd been, I guess as I'm getting older, a lot of my clients were coming to me were older, and I was written a book to focus on the over 50 job seeker. And that book went down really well, and it really cemented my reputation as working with the over 50s. I got more and more people contacting me. I got a lot of media work out of it. And it's a jolly good book. Even though it's written about 10 years ago, it's still got a lot of great stuff. And it's really interesting when I go on LinkedIn and I read what people are saying about finding a job at 50 plus and how hard it is. It's like, well, duh, it was hard 10 years ago. And I was writing about it then. But I guess the people who are in their early 50s now talking about it were in their early 40s then. So not really thinking about it. That's a great book. And it's still valid, still reliable, still useful. And then the next book that came out, which was a couple of years ago, was Rethinking Retirement for Positive Aging. Now, I seem to have skipped something, but along the way, I did a professional doctorate. And let me just take off this and just talk to you a bit. So there we go. So I'd always wanted to do a PhD. And I remember saying, I must have been in my 40s, because I was saying, like, I want to get one by the time I'm 50. And I never did. And several times I was looking into applying for one, but it's like, what am I going to research? And these forms were like really complicated and I didn't know what to do. And I was earning good money in my work. So it's like, it just got put to one side and put to one side. And then I found out about professional doctorates. So a PhD and a professional doctorate, same academic level, but you just come to it from different ways. So if you want to be an academic, and probably you're at the early starts of your career, you do a PhD. And if you've got years and years of experience of work, then they can utilize all of that as part of what you've done. And so you'd do a professional doctorate. And sometimes I just tell people I've got a PhD because they don't really understand the difference. But what it does is you could only do it if you've already got a master's degree. And I got my first degree in psychology. Then Royal Mail had sponsored me to do my MSc in occupational psychology. And they'd also sponsored me to do an MBA because the work I was doing was expanding and I was doing more work involved with business rather than just psychology. I was the psychologist in a multidisciplinary team in many cases. And then I was leading quite major projects. So because I'd got experience as a chartered psychologist, I was an associate fellow, I'd got my master's degree and everything. Then you can do a professional doctorate. And there's two parts to it. And one is called a systematic review. And with a systematic review, you have to look at all the literature, everything that's ever been said, basically, in whatever you're going to do your original research in. And then you move on to the original research. What I wanted to do was to research about the transition to olderhood and about that stage of life. Now, because he was doing it through an occupational psychology department, that was too far away. So I had to do something that was much closer to the workplace. So I said, okay, well, I'll do retirement. So my research that I was doing to begin with, my systematic literature review, was all based on psychological factors. Psychologist, what are the psychological factors that are going to be useful for you in later life and to make a success of later life to have. And then my original research was about meaning. And most people seem to do number crunching. It's what they call quantitative research. They get a load of data, they interview loads of people, they do online surveys, crunch all the numbers, and this is what you come up with. That's never appealed to me. I wanted to do something much more focused on people. So there's different ways that you could do that. And what I chose was something called IPA, which sounds like a beer, because it is, but it's interpretive phenomenological analysis. And please don't ask me to say that again. But this involved in-depth interviews with a smaller number of people, but you also had to basically, in my view, turn it into sort of like a poetic view of it. So you were looking for the deeper meaning, I can't even say it, phenomenological aspect of it. And it was hard. It was so hard. It was so hard how long it took me to analyze people. And I'd interviewed 15, and my supervisors said you only actually need to do 8, I think it was, so it might be 7, because there's just so much involved in it. It's all about depth, not about breadth. Now, I'd started this in the October before lockdown, and it's part-time, but because we had lockdown and suddenly any consultancy work I did ended. And so I pretty much became a full-time researcher. And anytime I went visiting anywhere, I took just like big piles of academic papers with me, and I got really, really good at reading them. So all of that eventually came to my thesis, which it's like, here it is. Here's one I prepared earlier, sort of thing. And I'm really proud of it, 64 and doing all that, when people often think, well, I've always disputed this thing about you're too old to do stuff. So I completed it in 2021, and it was like the week before Christmas, and I had my Viva. That's when you're interviewed, and they want to just check out you actually did the stuff and you know your stuff. And yeah, so for Christmas 2021, I'm like, Dr. Taylor. And I wanted to get it published in an academic journal, but I hadn't realised you had to pay. And it's fine if you're an academic, because it all comes as part of being an academic. But given I wasn't, and they were talking about £2,000 and taking a year, and it's like, I haven't got that sort of money to spend on it, and I didn't want it to take that long. And then I got a book deal with Routledge. So Routledge, they commissioned me to write a book on my academic research. So I think what I'm going to do now is to go back to my slides, because that will keep me focused. Okay, so this is the book that's based on my academic research, and all the books I'd written up to this point were really easy to write. And they were easy to write because I wrote what was in my head and the sorts of things I did with clients. Whereas this one, because Routledge is an academic publisher, what I was saying had to be in line with my research. I had to make sure that all my references were still included. And it wasn't a case of just rewriting what I'd already done. It was, it was rewriting it. I couldn't just sort of simplify it down. And it was way, way bigger than I'd expected or thought it was going to be. But I did think it was a good idea, because it was going to get me seen by a much broader audience than an academic paper. And it's gone down really well, and lots of people have thanked me, and I've got a reasonable number of people giving me nice write-ups on Amazon. But it's a dead good book. It's a really good book, but it is quite academic orientated. But that's not the reason that anybody can't read it, but it's just got, it's depth rather than one of these more easy read books that you can find. Okay, now also there's a few other things that I've done, and on the left, 17th century wedding customs. My second husband and I met through the Sealed Knot Reenactment Society, and we had a 17th century wedding. And this is back in 1997. And yes, there was the internet, but it wasn't quite like it is now. And I was reading all sorts of academic books or history books to find out about it. And we had a 17th century wedding. I mean, as many of the customs as we could, and we had people from the regiment there. And we had a 17th century banquet where you remove courses rather than how things are now. And the person who did the banquet for us is also a publisher. And he said, why don't you write a book? So it's more of a pamphlet than a book. And I currently don't have any because I gave my last one away. And yeah, I really need to try and get hold of some more. But I did have some, I think I've had 3 or 4 TV researchers or film researchers get in touch and say how useful the book has been for films that they've done. I don't think I ever got a credit, but you know, it was nice that it got utilised. And then the middle book, Factor Fantastic, was one that I wrote about me losing weight. I went from 22.5 stone to just over 12 stone. And I wrote a diary and I publicised it. It's still available. I'm not sure I'd write it like that now because it was like, this week I ate this week I did that. But, you know, I was quite proud of it back in the day. And I used to sell career values cards. And to keep the cost down, I used to have to order 500 at a time. So my spare bedroom always had these boxes and boxes of cards. And probably 2 or 3 years ago, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to stop selling them because I think people can do values exercises online now. So it's a bit sad, but it was something that I've been selling for years and years. Okay, so there's all that stuff going on as well. But as I said before, you know, I was just talking about the Rethinking Retirement book that I did based on my academic research. Okay, so on the left, there's me with my Tudor bonnet on. And I was so happy. And I went to the award ceremony and I was part of a cohort. There was 8 of us who were all studying at the same time. And only 2 of us had reached a point where we'd been awarded our doctorate at the same time as an award ceremony coming up. And the other person, Hannah, was overseas, so she couldn't come. So I was there on my own. And obviously there's loads and loads of, you know, graduates and people with master's degrees. And my husband was there with me, or my partner was there with me. And when I went up on stage, there was loads of cheering because, like, I was the only one from it. And also, you know, clearly I'm like loads older than the other people. And I was really, really excited about that. And then I submitted my research for an award. And last year, well, in 2024, gosh, we're 2026 now, I won the UK Career Development Awards. My editor said I was crowned Career Researcher of the Year. But that was a big thing as well, you know, to be recognised for the research that I did. You know, it was a big thing. I was researching an area that few people do. Few people are looking into later life, particularly looking into later life when they're actually living in later life as well. Okay, so I've left that as 1998. It's 1992. I'm not going to go and redo this again. But, you know, but this is my path to writing, not just the next book, but all my books. I've been working as an independent career psychologist. Oh, no, that's correct. Since 1998. Probably thousands of people. And you know, the books that I write are based on the work I do with clients, but they're also based on my academic research as well, and how I'm sort of integrating all of this. And by the way, I also own a wood, and that's a bench that I got in my wood because it means that I can look out at the trees, and I'm always really happy to be there. And I do a lot of my thinking down at the wood. So this is one of the things I think about it is I bring together with all the work that I do, professional expertise. I'm a chartered occupational psychologist. I'm a chartered psychologist. I'm an associate fellow of the British Psychological Society. And my doctoral research was into meaning and transition. How do people find meaning in life after full-time work? And what are the psychological factors that help? So it's my work, there's my research, but there's also, given I'm now 68 and a half, my own lived experience of work, health, aging, and identity. And that quote is what I wrote for my last book. But I think it's really important that the work I do is valid and vital for both the people working as career coaches, but also books that individuals can use themselves as well. You know, it's not just something for professionals to be using. So this is my last book, and Career Coaching for Midlife and Beyond. Again, I was commissioned to write this one. What they said to me, what my editor said, was, oh, I hope you say yes, because we've talked to about 6 people about this book, and they all say, oh, you've got to get Denise to do it. So how could I turn them down? And it sort of, it brings together everything I'd done with, you know, the 40 to 50-year-olds, but also what I'd been doing with the older people as well, people thinking around retirement and looking for that. And so I talk about how work identity shifts with age, and, you know, how our confidence can drop if you've been made redundant, if, you know, we've had some setbacks in life. And ageism, how it's not only ageism out there, it's the ageism in ourselves. And I make sure I cover that as well. There's lots of activities and tools and strategies for people to be thinking about. I think I've got 40 different, you know, proper activities for people to do. So it's a very useful book in that case. And I'm very pleased that I've done it. And I was commissioned to write it in April. Let's just take that off again. So I was commissioned to write it in the April. And at that point, I thought I was going to continue. I thought I was going to continue doing retirement type coaching up until maybe 75. I think that was what was in my head. And then stuff was happening in my personal life. And I thought, I'm going to take summer off. And I took 3 months as a sabbatical. I stopped seeing clients. The book was moving into pre-production, so I just did whatever needed to be done when it was coming back. And I began to think about my future. I was approaching 68, and I realised, having talked to a friend, that I had worked for 52 years, and it was like blinking egg. I mean, a lot of people have only worked for maybe 35, and to get your state pension, you just need 35 years worth of payments. But I'd worked for 52 years, and it made me think, do I want to carry on? Do I want to carry on doing exactly what I've done, or do I want to have a shift of focus? Now, I've got this wood, I've got 4 acres of woodlands. I've done the occasional retreat, but it's not something I'd ever publicised. And in a way, the wood was my sanctuary. It was a place that I could go and breathe, to escape from people, to escape from my thoughts, to escape from technology, escape from my thoughts, well, escape from one sort of thoughts. And it just enabled me to just think deeper. So as I'm there, looking after my trees, picking up branches, doing stuff, I began to think of a different future. And that was to return to what I wanted to do 7 years beforehand, which was about later life and olderhood. So that got me thinking about, do I actually take a break, and do I stop the whole career coaching work that I'd done? I mean, it's such a big decision to say no, because I kept on getting inquiries, even though I said I was on a sabbatical. So I could have carried on earning good money doing it. But I felt that sometimes you have to let go to allow space for something new to develop. So let's go back to some slides. So that's the one we've just been talking about. And I think also what we think about with the sort of people that book's aimed for is, you know, as we get older, there's more depth. We've lived more. We've got more lived experience. But also, we're not just thinking about getting the next promotion. We might have our parents, if they're still alive, getting quite frail. Goodness knows what's happening with our children. And also, we may start having some health problems, or noticing that our energy is dipping, and realising that all our identity is tied in with our work. So who are we without our job? So you can't just think about what's the next promotion, or what do I want to do next in my career. You really need to have the whole wider view taken into account as well. And this takes me to where I'm at now, which is Thrive Span. This is something that I started thinking about in 2019, before I even started the doctorate. And well, let me tell you what it is now. It's a philosophy and it's a model for intentional later life. So it started as a model because I have a friend, Jim, and Jim said to me a few years back, Denise, what you need is a model. Everybody else has a model. Well, clearly not everybody has a model, but the 5 steps or the 7 keys or something. And it got me thinking, and it was like, oh, what am I going to do? What are we going to do? Anyway, so let me just talk you through this slide, and then I'm going to just talk to you a bit more. So what this book is about, and what the whole process about ThriveSpan is, it's a model for later life, and as it says there, it integrates well-being, purpose, identity, and personal growth. And it's now, informs how I work with clients in midlife and beyond. Well, I've stopped working with them now, but the book is now in pre-production. So let me just remove that again. And so ThriveSpan is a model, and it's based on all the career theory that I've looked into and how to adapt it for later life. And again, I don't know anybody else who does this, because there are researchers who research later life, but they're all like youngish. Well, if they're 40, they're still young. And here's me at 70 next year, doing this. So I wanted to sort of get a theoretical perspective, but I also wanted to write a book. So I've been doing both at the same time. And you can see my Christmas tree still up in the background, because this is what I've basically spent the past 3 weeks doing, is finalising the book, which has gone off into pre-production now. So eventually it's going to come back from the copy editor. And I've also been developing my theory. And, I've got a doctorate. I understand how to write academic papers. And I have done it. And I'm doing this today as the day that I've got my paper into a pre-publication site, before I start trying to get it published by a site that's not going to cost me £2,000. But for me, it's been really important that I have the theoretical perspective that underpins the book. But the book is written in such a way that it's written that anybody can read. And I've mentioned about my wood a couple of times. And this is how I've structured my book. It's you arrive, you stop, you breathe, you center yourself, and then you imagine that you're at the start and there's 3 paths that you can go. And each of these 3 paths has got 3 glades, and you can decide to sit into any of the 3 glades. So it's not a book that you go through from start to finish, and you can open it up and think, you know what, I need to go down path 2, and this time I want to go through path 2 and glade 5, whatever. So I'm not going to go into detail of the book now, because this is going to be long enough anyway. But there will be a transcript around all of this. But sometimes I really like it when I can actually hear people talking and get the energy out of the voice and just see what they're like. So that's ThriveSpan. So let's go back onto the slides. I'm quite enjoying this whole thing about being tech competent, which is a good skill to have. So yeah, that's not the book cover yet. That's to come. But what I did today, as I said, I've got a preprint up, which is when you've written an academic article. I've only found out about this, honestly, these past few days, because it was as I was searching how to get my article published, and it's nearly 10,000 words. It's all properly referenced, and that you can put it up on a preprint site. Ta-da. So it is done now. So this is my academic paper, Reframing Later Life, a review of life stage theories and the development of ThriveSpan for the 60 to 80 life phase. This paper reviews key life stage and aging theories, including psychosocial, career development, lifespan, and meaning-based approaches, and examines their limitations in relation to contemporary later life. Now, it's written as an academic paper, so you might not want to read it, but everything within it will be coming into the book in much more simpler language, and I'll be sharing much, much more about this over the coming days and weeks and months. Yeah, what's next? That was me amongst the bluebells. I just want to continue writing. And because I'm not seeing clients, it gives me time to have more pauses, more time to spend with my trees, and more time just to be, to allow deeper reflection. I want to write deeper stuff. And I also wanting to do more of my nature-based work. Something I never talked about was I did a vision quest, and I did my vision quest. When I did my doctorate, let's just go back off, take that off again. So when I went to my interview to do my doctorate, and I'm there with the two people that could potentially be my supervisor, and they go like, "Oh, so what are you doing tomorrow? Or what are you doing this weekend?" I go like, "I'm going off on a vision quest," and they go like, "You what?" And again, vision quest is something I'll talk in more detail later, but it's 10 days and nights. Out in nature, and that includes what I call a 4-day solo, where you do 4 days and 4 nights without food, without shelter, and you've got a tarp, you've got plenty of water. But it really gave me a time out, and they identified me as somebody who would make a good wilderness rites of passage guide. So I've spent a 4-year apprenticeship as a wilderness rites of passage guide, so I've had that all going on as well. So that's why being at my wood, and twice now I've run vision quests, and I love them. I love supporting people, and I want to be doing more of those. So that's certainly what I want to be doing more of, and I want to be spending much more time at the wood. I think I could be, the lady that lives in the wood, and hey, that could be yet another book. So, and then I've already started, I've already started on another book, which I think will come out in the autumn, and it's called Olderhood Unfolding. And this started off in one way. And to be honest, when I was doing my doctorate, I was trying to write this book at the same time, and it's like, you truly are crazy now. So it had to stop. But the good thing about starting it and then revisiting it again is I've realized how I want to write this book is to write 52 essays, articles, I think that's better than essays, 1 a week, so that you can dip in, and they're all related to getting older. And I write these at the wood, I dictate them at the wood, and then when I get home, I can play about with my words and they're done. But I think all of them I've written as I've been in my woodland, just walking around and just seeing what inspiration I get. So that will be the next book that comes out. But I'm taking a bit of a break for now before I start on that one. But I think the idea of having 1 a week that people can read and reflect on, I thought was quite a nice way of doing things. And that's me. If you'd like to stay connected, of course, I'm on YouTube. And I'm on LinkedIn. I write a newsletter there, and also on Substack, Aging Reimagined. And on Mondays, I write things about later life. And on Thursdays, I write more in-depth stuff about olderhood. And, you'd be very welcome to come and join me in either of those two places. And if you've got to the end of this without switching off, thank you so much. I had no idea how long this was going to take for me to say. I had no idea whether I should just chunk this into 5-minute bits. But you know what? I just think it's something I want to do. And it's here. There's another part of, I guess, my legacy. So, wishing you well. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I've got all these shorts that are about a minute long. So plenty of those for you to have a look at. But I really wanted to write or to say something much more about my background. And I hope it's been of interest. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.